The original Super Mario Bros. Movie, not counting the Japanese one from 1986, set the precedent for video game movies generally being garbage. And it is objectively a bad adaptation, but does that make it a bad movie in its own right? No, not necessarily. It's a bad movie in its own right for completely different reasons, but I still kinda like it. Okay, let's get the obvious out of the way first. When I say that this film is a bad adaptation, that really doesn't do it justice, because it's legitimately one of the worst I've ever seen. The film leans more into science fiction despite the games being very clearly fantasy. Instead of being bright and colorful, it's dingy and dystopian, and the filmmakers apparently can't tell the difference between dinosaurs, turtles, and shiitake mushrooms.
Aw, come on!
The directors Rocky Morton and Annabelle Jankel mentioned that they played the game for research, but considering the final product, I honestly don't know why they even bothered. I mean, the name Thwomp has gone from being a living, floating stone that tries to crush Mario to a type of shoe, which is like if the Last of Us show turned cordyceps into a brand of deodorant. But that's all been covered a million times before, and quite frankly, since I know all of this going in, it honestly doesn't bother me as much as it probably should. And to the movie's credit, if you don't think of it as a Mario movie, which, to be honest, is really not difficult to do, there is a certain amount of enjoyment to be had. As much as I've complained about the world building, it does admittedly have a unique charm to it. The production design of Dino Hatton, where the movie mainly takes place, is really creative and does a good job of building this kind of aggressive and unwelcoming atmosphere. We've got stuff like police cars complete with barred passenger doors and bulldozer blades, prison cells in the form of small cages stacked on top of each other.
Germs everywhere, fungus.
Not to mention the dirty and industrial look the art direction has and the loud, crowded feel of the city. But the world is still kept somewhat fun and enjoyable thanks to elements like these cartoony and over-the-top character designs, these actually pretty good animatronic dinosaurs and creatures, and a somewhat comedic tone that can honestly be fairly clever at times. Like this scene of a dinosaur mother walking her unhatched egg in a stroller, or this scene where Mario and Luigi are met with what they think are guns pointed at them but are actually just cameras, resulting in these mugshots.
Are we dead?
I also find myself enjoying some of the characters. Again, almost none of them bear any resemblance to the characters from the games, either in terms of looks or personality.
It's me, Mario! Thank you so much for playing my game.
I'm gonna break every bone in their body, and then I'm gonna kill them.
But they can still be a little amusing in spite of that. Mario and Luigi have some decent comedic chemistry and work off the weirdness of the world pretty well. Mario, being the older and more mature of the two, is more of the straight man and doesn't put a lot of faith in otherworldly or fantastical worldviews.
Right now, a miraculous world. This guy just found out that he was in another dimension.
Never know.
The only thing miraculous I know is that we're still eating.
So a lot of his comedy comes from being either terrified or annoyed by all the strange things confronting him in the parallel dimension and the dangerous situations he's finding himself in.
Where's the rock, overweening rogue?
Not until you give us Daisy, biscuit head!
Where's the rock?
Shut up!
Luigi, on the other hand, is a little younger and more naive, so he's more willing to go with the flow in such a weird situation and generally be more of an optimist, which makes him an entertaining contrast to Mario.
Mario, look! Aliens? Oh, we gotta deal with aliens too?
Luigi, we're the aliens!
Yeah? Whoa, cool!
In general, they have a decent dynamic, and as miserable as Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo were while filming, for good reasons.
I got stabbed 4 times, electrocuted, broke a finger, nearly got drowned. And that's just what happened to me.
I think they play their parts well for what they had to work with. It's because of all that that I can happily watch the movie and enjoy it for what it is. Having said all that though, I'd be lying if I were to call this a good movie, because like I said, it really isn't. While I mentioned that stylistically I like the dinosaur world, it's not very well established as a main setting for a story. Said story revolves around Bowser, or King Koopa as he's called in the film, trying to invade the human world due to it having more resources and better living conditions than what the dinosaur world has to offer. But the lack of resources is never actually shown to the audience. Granted, Dino Hatton is a shithole, but not in any way that would suggest a lack of resources is directly the cause. Supposedly it's due to King Koopa's rule.
Got no resources, all because of the evil King Koopa.
But if that's the case, then shouldn't he at least have it easier than the rest of the world's inhabitants? Like, you'd think that he'd be hoarding all the resources for himself. I guess it's possible that he maybe squandered the resources due to incompetence, but if that's the case, it's not conveyed very well since we aren't given any insight into how he lost all of it, or even if he did lose it in the first place. And as much as I like the banter between Mario and Luigi, their personalities and bond don't go much deeper than that. We don't get to see much of their actual relationship as brothers, or any indication that they care all that much about each other. They mostly just bicker back and forth without ever getting any meaningful character development.
Anything's possible, Mario. You just gotta believe.
I believe the rent is 3 months overdue.
What would you do without your big brother?
I'd like to give it a shot and find out.
Hey, come on, pick a direction. Any direction you like. Hey, that looks good over there, huh? That's it, let's die there.
And because of that, the longer the film goes on, it starts to get more and more dull. The positive elements I've mentioned so far work, but they're not enough to keep me emotionally invested for an hour and a half, and the plot really does not pick up the slack. For example, the main personal stake that the characters have in the plot is Luigi's love interest Daisy. The problem is that they're given practically no screen time together, so there's pretty much no emotional connection between the two of them. There's an attempt at a connection with them being both orphans.
You mean you don't know who your mother and your father are neither? Cause Mario here brought me up.
But that never gets brought up again, so it doesn't affect his relationship with her or Mario for that matter. There's also the fact that Luigi's interest in the unknown makes him take a liking to her archaeological studies, but again, that doesn't get mentioned after the first few minutes of them meeting. And then they're just apart for most of the movie after Daisy gets kidnapped and they have to rescue her. Not to mention the fact that Daisy is given nothing to do for the majority of the runtime, and yet we keep cutting back to her every so often. It just makes her come across as a really uninteresting character who has no agency in the plot. Wait a minute. She spends the movie apart from the brothers and doesn't do anything for most of the story. That's just Princess Peach from the games. One of the few things that's actually faithful to the games, and it's the part that translates to a movie the worst. Also, let's not forget that the reason they met is because Luigi met her on the street and offered her a ride, which she accepted due to stories of girls in Brooklyn going missing and wanted to stay off the streets.
I'm asking you if you want to ride.
Okay, thanks.
So in other words, she decided to avoid a potential kidnapping by getting into a stranger's van. I mean, it worked, but still, weird choice. And as for the main conflict of the story, it's pretty... Hi, sorry to interrupt, but if you're enjoying this video, you might be interested to know that I've just launched a Patreon which you can donate to right now. For £2 a month, you'll get your name in the credits of every video. For £4 a month, you'll get that, plus I'll say your name aloud during the credits, and you'll get some sneak previews for videos as they're being made. And for £6 a month, you'll get all that plus some bonus written content exclusive to Patreon. Sometimes about media, sometimes behind the scenes stories about the videos I've made. I just recently wrote a post about the upcoming Mario movie and discussing what I think we can expect from Chris Pratt's performance. If that sounds spicier than the Koopa special, then click the link in the description below and thank you for supporting the channel. Now, back to the video. And as for the main conflict of the story, it's pretty underwhelming and honestly really poorly thought through. So the basic outline is that King Koopa is from a parallel dimension created by the impact of the meteorite that wiped out the dinosaurs. And in that dimension, humans evolved from dinosaurs instead of apes. Now he's found a portal to the human world and wants to find the remaining piece of the meteorite, which will somehow merge the two dimensions into one. Putting aside loyalty to the source material for a moment, there's a lot to unpack here. The first of which being that this movie's version of Koopa is not a very memorable villain. He's just kind of off to the sidelines for most of the movie and doesn't really get in the brothers' way all that much. He mainly spends his time sterilizing his hands and taking mud baths while his henchmen do all the work.
Where's my pizza?
Doesn't exactly make for an intimidating bad guy. It doesn't help that the movie never gives us any indication that he poses a significant threat to the human world either. He mentions that his planet consists of
A few miserable streets and an endless desert.
Doesn't sound like he would have much in the way of a population to help him overthrow a planet of billions of people. Of course, I suppose that doesn't matter too much considering that his plan to use the meteorite piece to merge the dimensions makes no fucking sense. For most of the movie, it's not clear what the dimensions merging would actually mean. And at the end of the movie, when it finally does happen, it's honestly pretty inconsequential. Koopa, Mario, Koopa's Tower, and a few Goombas get teleported into the human world. Why just them specifically isn't really made clear, but if that's all he wanted, then why did he need to merge the dimensions? We see very clearly that the characters can travel freely between the two worlds, meteorite piece or no meteorite piece. But this merging of dimensions ends up being so small scale that when Luigi manages to undo it after like a minute with no real issue, it doesn't feel like a huge crisis has been prevented because nothing really happened. Sure, Koopa turned this one guy into a monkey, but as far as we can see, the human race as a whole doesn't have anything to worry about. Hell, the humans that witness this aren't even scared. They're just like, hey, look at the man who just turned into a funny monkey. The only other characters that are actually worth a damn to the plot are Iggy and Spike, Koopa's cousins and classic bumbling henchmen archetypes.
I bag her, you grab her. No, I grab her, you bag her. That's what I said. Exactly.
They can be a little entertaining. They certainly play a more active role in the plot than Koopa does. Also, they have this line.
I am very disappointed in you, cousins.
Fascist! Oppressor of the proletariat!
There's a scene in the Super Mario Bros. Movie where someone calls Bowser a fascist. That's just hilarious to me. But they're not without their own problems. For one thing, they go through a personality shift halfway through the movie where they get evolved by Koopa and become supposedly more intelligent. But they're not really more intelligent though, they just kind of speak more eloquently.
That hardly seems logical, does it? Perhaps we should stay and formulate our own strategy. Tête-à-tête. Inner circle.
In terms of what they actually do from that point onward, they're still oblivious idiots. There's also this scene that takes place a few minutes before they get evolved where they speak to Koopa and they're talking intelligently even though nothing has happened to them yet.
That's exactly what I told him, sir! Exactly what I told him. Between you and me, Spike hasn't got a thought in his brain, sir!
And then in the post-credit scene, they're speaking normally again even though we never saw them be de-evolved.
Iggy's world. The indomitable Spike. The Super Koopa cousins!
From what I understand, the movie went through rewrite after rewrite even while they were filming. So if I had to guess, I'd say they probably filmed some of these scenes before the specifics of their evolution were finalized and then just left them in even though it created some pretty blatant continuity errors. That's just a theory on my part, but considering how mismanaged the project was, it wouldn't surprise me. Iggy and Spike also have a plot twist associated with them where it's revealed that they're secretly double agents trying to dethrone Koopa from the inside.
I think you ought to know that Iggy and Spike have been preaching your overthrow at the Boom Boom Bar.
Really?
But at no point was this ever hinted at beforehand. Throughout the first half of the film, they're the ones who kidnap Daisy and actively try to hinder the progress of the heroes. All the evidence shows that they are indeed on Koopa's side.
In the name of King Koopa, we arrest you!
They join forces with Mario and Luigi halfway through the movie, not because they want to help them, but because they make a deal with them.
Now what if we get to the rock? Will you get us Daisy?
I think that proposal would mutually benefit both our parties.
Which doesn't seem like a deal Mario and Luigi would take, considering it would mean Koopa would take over the world. But regardless, Iggy and Spike tag along with the bros for a good chunk of the adventure, and then the next time they see Koopa, they're helping to defeat him.
Princess Daisy, we've always been your loyalist supporters!
Despite them at no point before indicating that any of this was their plan. In fact, this plot twist was so poorly delivered that when I started writing this review, I misinterpreted what the movie was going for here. I thought that Iggy and Spike were supposed to be bad guys at the beginning and then redeem themselves at the end. I had a whole paragraph written about it and only figured out what the movie was actually doing on my third draft. You could argue that's partially my fault, but in my defense, I'm much more likely to remember them being evil since it gets reinforced throughout the entire first half of the film, rather than a couple of blink and you'll miss it lines of dialogue that don't gel with what we've seen before. The only other element of the plot that feels worth mentioning is the ending. The Mario Bros have defeated Koopa and saved both the dinosaur world and the human world. They're all ready to go home, but Daisy, learning that she's the rightful princess of Dino Hatton, decides to stay, meaning that she and Luigi have to part ways. This is meant to be an emotional moment, but it doesn't really feel that way because, like I said, Luigi and Daisy have had almost no screen time together and they've literally just met, so this doesn't strike me as much of a loss for either of them. It also begs the question of why they actually need to separate. I mean, sure, they're literal worlds apart, but the portal's still there. They can easily still go visit each other. You know, as evidenced by the fact that she does at the end of this movie, so what was even the point of this scene? And that's what I think of the Super Mario Bros. Movie. It's stupid, dull, poorly written, incoherent, mismanaged, a bad adaptation, a bad movie, and overall I like it. Like I said, the movie has enough charm and personality in terms of the characters, the aesthetics, the atmosphere, the world, and the general unrestrained, for better or worse, creativity that I'd argue the bad stuff is worth tolerating. So with that in mind, did it really deserve all the hate it got? Oh, absolutely, but I think as long as you know what you're getting into, i.e. an adaptation that doesn't understand or care about the appeal of the original material, and you're willing to just turn your brain off for some dumb fun, you might be able to get some enjoyment out of it, even if it might not hold your interest for the entire runtime. If you like this video, then consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll leave the link in the description below. Thanks for watching.